football is such a unique sport that the highs and lows for managers, for players, they're so extreme that you do become, you're almost seeking the next high. You know, for me, that's winning, and that's enough for me. I don't need anything to help me with that. But for some people who are different, they do chase the highs elsewhere. And I think whether that's substance abuse, gambling, there's so many different things that people can chase that are actually negative for themselves. I just think it's something that players need to be aware of and to talk about. And the only high they should really seek is the high of life.
Back Onside are here at the Vitality Stadium. We've had the pleasure of sitting down and speaking to AFC Bournemouth manager Eddie Howe. He provides fantastic insight into his career, mental health and a whole wide range of other issues. Let's hear what he had to say.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult going back. I was Harry's first signing. He probably wouldn't tell too many people now that I was, because it didn't go great for me. I got 2 injuries. I got one on my debut. That was a minor injury, and then the second one I got at the start of the season against Nottingham Forest was the start of the end of my career, really, because I never came back to the player that I was. And when you're very focused to do well at a new club, and I went for a transfer fee, that sort of feeling of not being able to play because of a physical injury was very difficult. I felt like I'd let Harry down, and I felt like with the fee I was very disappointed not to be able to repay that faith. So it was a very difficult time.
Does the frustration there come from the fact that it's not something you can control, an injury? If you're not playing well enough, or you're, for example, anything like that, you can control it, you can put extra training in, but with an injury, you've got no control over it at all. Yeah,
and that was very much the case. I felt powerless to a degree and initially there was probably a period of about a year where I wasn't really diagnosed properly as well, so I was struggling to find a solution to the injury. I was struggling to actually have a clear path back to playing, so the immediate future looked quite bleak for me. So I was sort of a year into my injury and still no closer to coming back, and I felt a long way detached from the team at that point. I had those feelings of isolation. The team itself and the club was doing really well, just got promoted to the Premier League, but I felt a long way from that.
I was talking to John McLean yesterday. He's the Chief Medical Officer at the SFA. He talked about when players suffer from mental health, one of the things can be social isolation. You've just talked about it there, whether that be coming back from injury away from the main group, or whether that's a foreign player moving over and being away from the family. How hard is that to deal with when you had your injury, when you're away from the group?
Yeah, I think it's one of the best things about being a footballer and part of a team sport is the dressing room, the feeling of walking in and having those relationships, having a laugh and a joke, and it makes you feel when it's really good, when the group's really good, it makes you feel special, and it's a special thing to be part of. I think I was lucky on one hand that I had very good family around me. Portsmouth was only local to where all my family were living, so I was okay sort of away from the club. I think it was at the club where I felt I didn't really know my teammates because I'd only just joined, and as I said, I was struggling to find out what was wrong with me, and I did feel detached from it through no one's fault, not Harry's fault, none of my teammates. It was just, I didn't feel part of the dressing room at that time just because of I was a new player, just joined. So then you feel it can be a lonely existence. You're going for treatment and to try and get back, and then you're going back home quite quickly.
How difficult is it to deal with when you go into a new dressing room? You spoke about loneliness. Is it something that brings a lot of pressure on you and you kind of struggle with in terms of like anxiety and stuff, going into somewhere where there's probably a lot of big characters and definitely a big manager in terms of personality?
Initially, when I was fit and playing, I felt fine. It was a really, really exciting part of my career. I was looking forward to the next step. Then when the injury happened, I've got to be honest and say that my initial concerns were trying to have confidence in my body again, trying to have the thought that I was going to come back fit playing, and all that uncertainty as to whether I would or wouldn't. You go away from the club and you go back home and you're thinking, I was constantly analysing my body and going, is this going to be right again? And then you begin to think about the future, and that's when, from my side, I began to, I wouldn't say worry, because I was young enough and felt I had enough time to come back, but you certainly worry about the future from, well, I started to worry about the future from that point.
So you at a fairly young age, because of the injuries, you started to worry about the future in 10, 15 years' time. Did you prepare for that in any way back then, in terms of, was coaching always an option for you?
No, I wasn't thinking about coaching at that stage. I've got to be honest, it wasn't in the forefront of my thoughts. I was desperate to try and make it to the top as a player. And of course, at that time, I didn't know that my body was going to not allow me to get there. So I was putting every ounce of energy that I had into finding out what was wrong with my knee. And then when I did finally get it sorted by going to America, I put all my efforts into coming back to be the best that I could be. So the longer term picture was sort of in the back of my head, but I wasn't really doing anything about it at that moment.
Now you're a manager, when players get injured and you have to deal with them, and it's a long way back for some players, does your time as a player when you had these injuries help you deal with them?
Definitely. I think I always try and obviously speak to our medical team, and our medical team will be having the same thoughts that I will have, to make sure we try and diagnose the injury right, we try and treat it right, and if we don't know the answers, trying to send them to the best people in the world to do that for them. And I think that the medical side of football has improved so much since my time that invariably now, don't get me wrong, there's still maybe some problem injuries that we don't quite get right, but the majority, I think, get a very good diagnosis and get the right treatment, which I think is key to the mental well-being of the player. So I think trying to make sure that they're not isolated from the group, trying to give them support. Obviously, there's a lot for players to think about. Some players may be coming out of contract. Are they newly signed to the club? Have they been here a long time? All those things, I think, you have to treat on an individual basis to give the player the right support.
Talk about coming towards the end of your career and that happened for you, but for a lot of players in general, that can bring on a lot of stress and anxiety and worry, because they don't know what the next option is as well. How do you deal with players now that are coming towards the end of their career and they're going through that thought process?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, because the player themselves won't necessarily think they're coming to the end of the career. You could have an idea and go, well, that's a tough injury for them at this stage of their career. How are they going to come back? But the player himself doesn't want to be dwelling on any negative. So it's a really delicate balance how you handle that situation as a manager, because you want to give the player the right tools to, in that moment, be able to recover and have a clear plan beyond where they are at that moment. So trying to give them options to see that what are they going to do at the end of their career without telling them the end is coming is a difficult thing to do. So we try and give them various things that they can look at in terms of further education, coaching courses. We try and push them in that direction. And I would encourage anyone to do that regardless of their age, if they're 29, 30 or whether they're 18, 19. Sometimes as an 18-year-old, it's very difficult to get them in that mindset. Probably easier with the older player. But it is a very difficult one, that. And you don't want to say the wrong thing to a player and then think that I'm writing him off. The player's always got to believe he's going to come back and play again.
Talk about the support for players you provide at Bournemouth now, but back when you were a player, there's a very different society around football. If you showed mental weakness, that people could pick on that and see it as a negative and a fault. How much do you see mental health, the awareness of it, increasing as you've went through your career from a player to the modern day, 2019 as a manager? Yeah,
there's definitely a lot more awareness of I think from every angle, whether it's performance, whether it's personal issues, that there's a lot more, I'm trying to think of the right word, gravitas given by clubs to psychologists, by the players themselves. I think it's been a really healthy thing for the players. There's less stigma attached to it now, which is a great thing. I think players can talk a little bit more freely about how they feel. That's a great thing, and I think that's something that we've got to continue to push from all angles for the benefit of the players. So it's going in the right direction, but I think if I just go back to when there was a psychologist, actually. We were really lucky. We had a forward-thinking manager and a forward-thinking club. but there was still, as you say, a feeling from within that if you went to seek help about an issue, how would that be perceived? I think that's gone now, but definitely when I was playing, it was there.
How important is mentality in a player? Because a lot of people say, oh, it's like 30% ability and natural talent, but 70% the mental side of things. How important is that to a player? I was listening to a Scottish manager the other day. He says if you've got a good player who's mentally right and mentally confident, they can be a great player. If you have a great player whose mentality is not right, they could go to a bad player straight away. How important is mentality to the modern footballer?
Well, I remember as a player being told that ability is a small part and mentality is a huge part, and I was like, yeah, I'm probably right, but I didn't quite fully understand it when I was playing. Mm-hmm. And again, when you go into coaching and managing, you then go, that's absolutely right. You need an element of ability, of course you do, but then you need the right mentality, because if you have the right mentality, your ability will come out in the right way. So important that you come in every day with the desire to improve, to work, that you prepare right, and all these things that are away from the training ground are to do with how you think, and that's where the biggest improvement comes from. So mentality is everything, I think, to the player to get to the very top.
Well, because you're probably alone during that period with your thoughts and there's a lot of uncertainty, that can be a real worry maybe when you're alone with your thoughts. Whereas in the sport, when you're active and stuff, it improves your mental health. That's something you'd agree with, that when you're alone with those thoughts, it can become a very dangerous place for anybody, but particularly an athlete.
Yeah, I think if say you come to the end of your career as a footballer, and through injury, and you don't have a family, and you're sat on your own, and you don't have a support network, I think that's incredibly difficult. And you've seen a lot of people that have gone on to make some bad decisions on the back of that. And that's where I think the family side of it is so important. Even your agent, someone needs to try and help you and guide you in that period, or you need to seek help and communicate your feelings. I was really lucky that I had a really good family network around me. I had someone that believed in me and gave me an opportunity, but I didn't really feel alone. And then I had my own thoughts to go, right, now I'm going to have to work hard and do something else. And I'd sort of got my head around that pretty quickly, probably because from my moment of injury I was 24, if I'm right, and I retired at 29. So I sort of, with those 5 years, although there wasn't a moment where I thought the end's come until the end came, I probably mentally had begun preparing in some way for the end.
It's interesting you mentioned the family, because I always remember Sir Alex Ferguson saying that he kind of encouraged his young players to settle down and get married and have children, because he felt that can impact their performances on the pitch to a greater extent. Is that something you'd agree with, Sir Alex?
Yeah, so true. I mean, I'm not saying I push my players into relationships or marriages that because that's none of my business, but my preference would be for players to have a settled life away from the pitch, find a partner, if they want to have children, try and build that solidity away from football, because they train here for such a short period of time during a day. They then have a lot of time either on their own or around their family, and those family are so important to ground you, support you, and build those structures in your life that are so important. The routine is very, very important. So I would highly recommend it for peak performance, to be honest, because obviously if you're single, the natural temptation is that you want to go out and find someone. No one wants to, I don't think, wants to sit alone. And of course then that leads to other things that can be negative for any sportsman. So yeah, that's definitely my preference.
Talk about social isolation. Players, they come in from training, you probably let them leave about midday, 1 o'clock, you might do extra work. Fans and the general public might not see football as quite a lonely industry, but for some players it must be that, especially with foreign players that maybe come over without their family. As a coach now, as a manager now, how would you help them adjust to life in Bournemouth or the surrounding areas? Yeah,
you're right. I think the big things in terms of isolation can be injuries, of course, we spoke about, but obviously new players coming in that don't have that network of friends or associates around the football club. fill their time with. So yeah, I mean, I don't think our players would necessarily finish that early. We try and fill their days a bit more than that, but there's still a good chunk of the day where if a player signed from another country, what do they do? Where do they go at that moment? They don't know anybody. So I think building their networks for them, trying to help them with people that they can build relationships with is key. And I think there is a time then that they will then find their life and routine that works for them and makes them happy. But definitely being aware of signs that can be that tell you there's a problem, I think is key.
You talk about a lot when a player comes over from, say, a foreign player for a high fee, and there's a lot of pressure on them to perform. You spoke about it earlier when you mentioned even back at Portsmouth, £400,000 was the fee. You felt that pressure to live up to that price tag. The people often forget that these people are coming to different cultures or moving their families to different country, a language they don't speak, and that they need time to settle in. And people maybe don't pay attention to that off the pitch.
No, they don't. I mean, I think there's a pressure on you to perform from the first minute, and if you're not performing, then there's always questions asked, and that's the industry you're in. I felt £400,000 now doesn't seem a great deal of money, but back then I felt feelings of guilt towards everybody connected with the club. I'm not producing, I'm not giving anything back, even though it wasn't really my fault. And so now with the figures that are involved, I'm sure players have the same feeling. So everyone's different. But yeah, I think we need a little bit of patience and time, give people time to get to their very best levels, and support. You know, and that's, as a club, we have to deliver the things the players need so they feel comfortable and happy so they can produce their best on the pitch.
Can you go back to your career and speak about a very difficult time for you when you chose to leave Bournemouth and you moved to Burnley? That must have been an incredibly difficult decision to leave a club which has obviously meant so much to your career at that point. How difficult was that decision, and how important was it to seek the advice of your support network? You spoke about your family and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was a really nice, I have to say it was a really nice thing, because obviously you're doing a good job and there was other clubs that wanted me, and I felt at that moment, for various reasons, there was loads of different feelings attached to the decision, that it was best for me to leave. I decided to take the furthest job away, probably consciously, so I had a couple of options in London, but I felt I wanted to fully show my commitment to my new club, and I think by moving to Burnley was a sign that I was going to commit my whole being into that football club. So we decided, yeah, let's go for it. And it wasn't an easy call. Leaving Bournemouth the first time was tough as a player, and the second time was probably even harder as a manager. Never an easy thing to do, but I felt it was the right moment.
You spoke about finding it important to go somewhere further north, and you moved up there with your family, yeah?
So again?
Did you move up to Burnley with your family?
I went with my wife. I'm just trying to think when my kids were born. No, it was just my wife at the time, so it was my wife and my dog. That's who came with me.
Because it's interesting when Jose Mourinho obviously went to Manchester United, he stayed in a hotel and his family stayed down there. Again, people probably see managers 3 p.m. on a Saturday, or now Sunday at 1 p.m. or whatever, but it's not a 9-to-5 job, is it? It must be a lot of hours put in when you're by yourself in your office, and how difficult can that be to deal with as well? Yeah,
I think the managing is totally different to playing, totally different in terms of time spent at your work. So I think the reason why my wife was able to come is because we didn't have children in that moment in our lives, so there wasn't ties with schools, so she was able to come with me. The problem wasn't so much at that moment for me, it was more really for her. And you know, you talk about new players struggling to adapt to new countries or cultures, but for her, it's, you know, I'm working, so I've taken her to Burnley, and obviously I'm working I'm leaving at 6 in the morning, I'm getting back at 7, 8 at night. You know, they're long days for me, but that's fine, I'm busy. You know, for her at that moment with no children, it's also making sure that your support network's okay. So that's obviously a pressure you've got to deal with as well. It's not just you.
Eventually, when you chose to leave Burnley after quite a short spell, it was due to personal reasons off the pitch. We won't go into them in specifics, but how hard a period was that for you, that people maybe criticised your decision to leave for Burnley, but they didn't know the full story about what was going on in your personal life? Did you find that difficult to kind of put your message across and just deal with in general?
Yeah, it was very difficult, because you don't necessarily want to go into details of things that have happened, but you want people at the same time to understand why you've made the decision that you had. So I had a bereavement. My mum died, and I just found it incredibly difficult to deal with. My mum was my closest person in my life, apart from my wife, had done so much for me in my life. It's a very sudden illness and death, which sort of knocked me sideways. And the reality is, and I think this is a key thing to talk about. So the bereavement happened on a Saturday. We were playing on the Saturday. I wasn't at the game. I was with my mum. But then on the Monday morning, it's like, well, okay, I've got to get back to work, and had no time to sort of deal with it. And as I said, because it was really sudden, it just knocked me. And then how could I give my sole focus to my job when I'm emotionally, in a different place? So I found that period very, very difficult to deal with. And it was only really by coming back to Bournemouth, because obviously you've got not just your own thoughts to deal with, you've got your thoughts of those closest around you. And coming back to Bournemouth certainly helped me mentally to support my family at that time.
Did you seek help at that time? Was there help around the club in terms of psychology and stuff like that? Or in hindsight, do you maybe wish there was, and that could have helped you deal with a situation?
I had a very, very good support behind me in terms of
wife and your family.
Yeah, my wife was really good, and of course the people at Burnley all the way through were excellent with me. Really, really supportive. Couldn't ask any more of anyone there at the football club. I didn't really seek, I tried to process things myself and try and find the answers that I wanted to internally rather than externally. And as I said, for my own, I felt okay. I came to terms with it and was in a much better place. But those people around me then, they weren't in such a good place. So I think that was, behind my decision to come back.
Your nephew Andy, who's part of the recruitment team now, he spoke out very openly about struggling with that period with his mental health. He initially said that he was worried to kind of talk about it, didn't want to burden anyone. Did you have any inclination at that time, being close to him, that something wasn't quite right?
No, otherwise I'd have gone to him and spoke to him myself and tried to give him my support. And I think that's one of the big things with mental health. You don't quite know how people are feeling behind the scenes. When they close their doors at night, you don't know how they're thinking and feeling unless they communicate it with you. So, or you see visual signs that you need to speak to that person. And I think that's one of the big things on the back of things that he said, which I think is really good because it raises the profile of it and it can help other people. But no, I had no idea that he was suffering in the way that he was.
He spoke about how much better it made him feel when he came out and spoke about it. It is really a hidden illness, and you can't detect the signs physically or visibly to a huge extent. How proud were you when he came out and spoke about it, and your reaction? He spoke about how big an influence you were on him in that stage.
Yeah, I think from his perspective, I'd applaud him for just saying how he feels and for highlighting it to help other people. I think that's the key thing. I think he's made those comments to try and influence other people maybe feeling the same thing, and they're very proud of the fact that he's willing to do that, to make a difference.
You something else you spoke about, which is not about when you started your career at Portsmouth and Bournemouth, was social media. It plays such a massive impact and a massive role in everyone's lives, whether we like it or not. What's your feelings towards social media and like the abuse a player or even a manager can get on there by people who can hide their identities and stuff like that, and it can go from quite not a lot of criticism to pretty severe stuff, from racism to really insulting stuff about your family life?
Yeah, it's difficult for me because I'm not on social media, genuinely not on any platforms. I try and detach myself from it for those reasons, really. I don't need to hear other people's opinions of me. I know when I've done a good job and I know when I've done a bad job, and I think having those thoughts, judging myself is all I need. I don't need other people to judge me who may not know the whole story. So, but other players and people may feel the need to be on social media, and that's their right, and I wouldn't criticise them for that. But it does open you up to other people's opinions and comments that you might not want to read or hear. And then how you deal with those is, again, it's very, very important that you try and see them for what they are.
There's huge scrutiny on the players now because everything they do, people comment on, everyone's got an opinion. Do you have rules and regulations you set the players in terms of their social media use?
Well, we only would comment to the players about their social media use in terms of what they say. So we have no way of filtering, what they hear or what they see on there, but definitely how they communicate to the wider world. I think that's really important. They try and be very positive, don't say anything they shouldn't say, and conduct themselves in the way that we would want them to as a football club. I think that's really, really important. That they give the right messages out to everyone that's reading what they've got to communicate.
Another thing that Libby does is she goes into change rooms with players, former players, and they speak generally, and then they open the floor to questions so people can speak publicly about their problems within a change room environment. And she finds that speaking amongst their peers and their teammates and their friends helps people speak out. Do you think that's something that could work down here in the change rooms at Bournemouth or any club, for example?
Yeah, I think anything that gets players talking to each other, there's it's difficult sometimes with the modern day player to get them to communicate effectively, whether that's on the pitch, off the pitch. So any forum where you get players actually talking openly and honestly, I think can only help them. And even if someone doesn't talk but just listens and takes in the conversations that are happening, but it's educating them at the same time or helping them in some way, then that's a hugely positive thing.
In terms of issues at the moment surrounding the game, there's been huge coverage of racism recently because of the incidents in Bulgaria with the English national team. One of your former players, Tyrone Mings, the abuse started with him. He's an individual who comes from a very interesting background. He's fought a lot of adversity in his life to get to this stage. He spoke after, and he spoke brilliantly about racism, and as a former manager you must be incredibly proud of Tyrone and what he done on that day.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think for Tyrone he's had a very, very interesting journey, as you say, to get to this point. Loads of setbacks, loads of disappointments along the way, but he's held his confidence together, his desire to get to the very top together, and he's done brilliantly to get to where he is. I think the way he handled himself, if you consider that was his England debut, and he's being racially abused right from early in the game, I believe. He's produced a great performance and answered all the criticism or the abuse in the right way. Full credit to him. That must have been incredibly tough. Extremely proud of him and the way he's conducted himself.
Going back to talk about mental health and the academies, a lot of work we do at Back Onside is trying to educate the children coming through, because even at that age they can be prone to having issues with their mental health. How important is educating the next star and the next players coming through? Because that's something that you probably didn't have when you were coming through the ranks.
Yeah, I think when I look back to my academy life, I think it was probably similar training, to be honest, to what they do now, but I think a lot bigger network now of coaches. So I think there was probably one coach per 20 players back then. I think now, when I go to watch the academy, the younger groups, there's a lot of support, a lot of coaches, a lot of injury prevention work going on, a lot of medical work going on, and then I think within that then a lot of psychology work going on, which is great, because as you say, if you can educate the young players in terms of how to think and how to deal with certain situations, then you're going to produce much more rounded individuals as they get into their teens.
We'll go into a specific example in a minute, but how important is it that you have older players in the dressing room that can help young players come through? We talk about it a lot in football. There's a real lack of leaders maybe in the game. You had back in the day to have your Roy Keanes and stuff like that, Vieira's, great leaders. Is that something that you find's maybe dropped out the game a little bit in terms of real leaders that can help bring through the young boys?
I'm not sure. I think there are still a lot of really good leaders in the game, but I think they're slightly different in style compared to the guys you mentioned. So I think there's more in the game now. There's more leaders who will maybe lead by their professionalism and their conduct, rather than their voice being their authority. So I think we've got some great pros here who are brilliant role models for the younger players to follow and to speak to. And I almost think that type of leadership as well, the players are more open to conversations and to communicating effectively. So, just different styles of leaders now, I'd say, rather than going back a few years. I think they were different.
Do you think this comes from a change in society now, where maybe you can't speak to a player the same way in this day and age that you could back in that day. You can't maybe shout at them as much as you used to be able to, and it's just kind of everything's kind of changed in the world of football.
It has, yeah, definitely agree with that. I think the days of, you know, the big dressing room rants and teacups and all that kind of stuff, I wouldn't say it's totally gone, but it's definitely changed, which I think is a good thing actually for the younger players. You want the dressing room to be a safe environment where they feel like they're learning and being educated and corrected in mistakes rather than being lambasted for them, and I think that's a positive change.
For that time a few years ago where there wasn't many young English managers coming through, and the criticism was that young English managers weren't getting the top jobs. Now you look at Frank Lampard's at Chelsea, Steven Gerrard's at Rangers. How important is it that these young coaches, young British coaches, English, Scottish, whatever, are given a chance?
It's nice, don't get me wrong, it's nice, but I've always said that for me it's the best man for the job, for that respective club. The owners and the decision makers of these clubs will try and pick the best guy, and whether that's an English person or a manager from abroad, everyone's got to do what's right for their respective team. But it is great to see Frank and Stephen, as you say, doing such great jobs at big clubs.
Stephen's also got one of your players on loan, Jermaine Defoe. He's been brilliant on the pitch. Up in Scotland, he's scored lots of goals, which he has done throughout his career, but a lot of people have been commenting on his impact off the pitch in the change room. What sort of character is he around the group and around the training facilities? Is he someone that can be a real influence to younger players? Yeah,
he's one of those guys that I'd have said earlier, you know, the captains, the leaders of the group who lead by how they act. And Jermaine, one of the best professionals I've seen, lives his life brilliantly, eats well, trains well, prepares his body. Everything that you'd want from a young player, he does. But he's also now at the age where he can grab players and talk to them on a one-to-one level, and with all he's achieved in the game, just give them those pearls of wisdom that make a difference. So having people like Jermaine in your dressing room, you know, for us, he was absolutely brilliant. And now he's doing a similar job for Rangers in the respect that he's playing, scoring goals, but also developing the team around him, which is great to see. Hi, this is Eddie Howe from AFC Bournemouth. I just wanted to say to any player who feels they need to talk, seek guidance, help, support, then go to the people at Onside. They can really help you make a difference to your career and to your life if you need it.